December 8, 1941, dawned grimly at Wickham Beach on Oahu, in the territory of Hawaii. Nen Kazuo Sakamaki felt the scorching grains of sand pressing into his cheek as he fought to stay alert, his hands grasping futilely at the shore while relentless waves pounded his weary frame. Tucked inside the sodden pocket of his uniform lay a tiny journal holding entries that could spell instant death at the hands of his commanding officers. "I have let down the Emperor. I have stained my family's legacy for 10,000 generations. Only death can restore my honor." Peering through eyes raw from the brine, he spotted the muzzle of a rifle aimed squarely at him. Looming above in the early morning glow stood an American trooper. Sakamaki shut his eyes, bracing for the shot that would erase his disgrace. But instead of gunfire, he caught phrases that upended every lesson about the ruthless foes from across the sea. "You're secure here. We'll ensure you receive proper care." Corporal David Akwai from the 298th Infantry had just taken into custody the very first Japanese captive held by U.S. forces. This individual, who had braced for torment, disfigurement, and execution, as Imperial broadcasts had warned for any foolhardy enough to yield to the savage Yankees, discovered a fate far different. Neither soldier realized then that this seizure would kick off a pivotal segment of World War II's legacy. The gradual unraveling of Japan's rigid wartime dogma via unforeseen U.S. compassion. From 1941 to 1945, around 5,000 Japanese troops ended up in POW camps across the continental United States, while thousands of others were detained by coalition partners in Australia and New Zealand. Overall, Western allies seized between 35,000 and 50,000 Japanese prisoners throughout the conflict, a strikingly low figure given the vast scope of fighting in the Pacific. Every one of them dreaded savage treatment. Everyone feared interrogation horrors. Everyone readied himself for execution. Yet those transported to the States met warm baths, daily rations of 3 squares, health care, and safeguards under the Geneva Convention that shook them to their core. Not through malice, but through mercy they struggled to comprehend or embrace at first. The code of the Imperial Japanese Army brooked no exceptions. Death over disgrace, triumph or oblivion. Surrender was unthinkable. The 1941 field manual handed to each Japanese fighter offered zero guidance on POW status, deeming it an inconceivable end. A loyal son of Japan would perish in combat or perform seppuku before letting enemies seize him breathing. This went beyond rhetoric. It permeated the essence of every enlistee from day one. During his time at the Imperial Naval Academy, where Sakamaki honed his skills, teachers constantly drilled into recruits that their existence served the Emperor alone. Self-preservation paled in comparison. Dignity towered above all. Capitulation wasn't simply tactical defeat. It was a profane taint that doomed forebears and heirs eternally. No gulf yawned wider than that with U.S. Armed Forces ethos. Whereas Yanks learned about the Geneva Convention and their entitlements as possible detainees, Nipponese ranks were conditioned to view imprisonment as synonymous with agony and demise. Drills in Japan vividly depicted alleged Yankee outrages. Tales of captives flayed, subjected to vivisections, or devoured by flesh-hungry adversaries. The reversal stung bitterly. Even as their troops absorbed tales of U.S. savagery, Japan's own forces perpetrated verified barbarities throughout the Pacific theater. The Bataan Death March, compelling 60,000 Filipinos and 15,000 Americans to trudge 65 miles under blistering sun-sans sustenance or hydration, claimed countless lives, and it unfolded mere months after Sakamaki's apprehension. In the end, Japanese handling of Allied POWs proved fatal for 27% of those in their grasp, versus a mere 4% mortality rate for coalition captives in Axis facilities. Still, upon stirring in a spotless infirmary cot at Sand Island, Hawaii, Sakamaki encountered U.S. physicians mending his wounds, caretakers delivering nourishment, and superiors greeting him with protocol-befitting rank. The mental clash proved excruciating. He pleaded with his guards to permit his self-inflicted end, only to face their refusal delivered with baffling forbearance. By March 9, 1942, Sakamaki reached Camp McCoy in Wisconsin, marking him as the inaugural arrival among nearly 3,000 Japanese POWs to populate America's biggest such facility for enemy troops. The trek from Hawaii via San Francisco and onward through the heartland served as his initial glimpse into Yankee plenty. Far from a livestock transport or boxcar, he rode a civilian railcar boasting padded accommodations. Escorts carried weapons, to be sure, but so too came consistent feedings thrice per day. Gazing out the carriage panes, he beheld a nation defying all indoctrinated notions, urban centers aglow with illumination, undimmed by conflict. No blackout. There were no blackout curtains, no preparations for air raids, and no evident indications of the all-out war effort that had gripped Japan since 1937. Ordinary people carried on with their routines as though the attack on Pearl Harbor was merely a remote annoyance, not the crushing strike that Japanese media portrayed it to be. The U.S. Armed Forces' choice to primarily accommodate Japanese prisoners of war, PSWs, at Camp McCoy, along with lesser groups at Camp Kennedy in Rhode Island, Camp Clarinda in Iowa, and Angel Island in California, stemmed from both logistical and tactical factors. These sites were distant from the West Coast, the region with the strongest anti-Japanese feelings, and situated in places urgently requiring farm workers. Spanning 60,000 acres of Wisconsin landscape, Camp McCoy's immense size alone left Japanese PSWs, familiar with their densely packed homeland, in awe. Initially constructed for training purposes, the facility had been quickly adapted to hold prisoners as they started arriving from the Pacific Front. By 1944, it contained captives from various countries, Germans, Italians, and Japanese, in distinct sections. The camp commandant, Colonel Harold Rogers, had been given explicit directives from Washington. Japanese prisoners must receive treatment in full compliance with the Geneva Convention, irrespective of the handling of American captives by Japan. Rogers later confessed that this directive ranked among the toughest he ever enforced, given the grim realities facing U.S. prisoners in Japanese facilities. The Japanese prisoners were placed in Compound 3, isolated from the Germans and Italians by dual barriers crowned with razor wire. Every barracks accommodated 50 individuals in private bunks equipped with mattresses, linens, and covers, a level of comfort unimaginable for troops who had bedded down on rocky cave surfaces in the Pacific. The structures featured electrical lighting, heated water, modern sanitation, and central heating systems that shielded occupants from Wisconsin's harsh winters. The on-site hospital especially amazed the Japanese medical staff among the detainees. In stark contrast to the dire lacks they had endured in battle areas, Camp McCoy's health resources encompassed X-ray devices, operating tools, and sufficient stocks of drugs, including the groundbreaking antibiotic penicillin. No aspect undermined Japanese military conditioning quite like the provisions at mealtimes. 3 times each day, the prisoners received servings that surpassed the scarcity Japanese citizens had faced since 1940. The standard 2,800-calorie allotment equaled that of U.S. troops, featuring proteins, produce, grains, dairy spreads, brewed beverages, and sporadic sweets. Upon discovering Japanese eating habits, the camp officials supplied rice and soy condiment to the Japanese area. Such adaptations, foes tailoring sustenance for captive well-being, sparked deep mental turmoil for the PSWs. Within the Japanese forces, routine hunger was the norm for troops. Yet here, detainees were consulted on their culinary likes. The facility's galley proved especially astonishing. Japanese prisoners tasked with food preparation encountered powered blenders, large-scale cooling units, and fuel-powered ovens capable of feeding masses. This equipment outpaced Japanese innovations by generations. Even more unsettling was the excess. Daily disposals of uneaten items, mandated by rules to prepare surplus and guarantee plentiful provisions. One of the deepest assaults on Japanese martial principles arose from an unlikely origin, the camp's place of worship. Japanese prisoners were not just allowed, but urged to observe their spiritual traditions. A Buddhist altar was set up, furnished with fragrant offerings from the Young Men's Christian Association, YMCA. U.S. followers of Christianity furnishing aids for the veneration by adversarial troops. The prisoners could conduct regular rituals, mark Buddhist observances, and perform burial ceremonies for the rare cases of fatalities from sickness or wounds. Such deference to faux faith practices flew in the face of all they had learned about U.S. cultural savagery. Adding to the astonishment were Japanese-American troops acting as linguists and sentries. These Nisei members, often from the 402nd Regimental Combat Team and Military Intelligence Service, were citizens of Japanese ancestry whose relatives languished in relocation centers, yet who fought loyally for their nation. Come summer 1944, workforce deficits in U.S. farming prompted Japanese prisoners to labor on fields in Wisconsin. Michigan, and Iowa, in opposition to the coerced toil Japanese troops demanded from Allied prisoners on the Burma Railway, where 12,000 Allied detainees perished. U.S. overseers compensated Japanese workers at rates identical to those for German and Italian captives. The assignments exposed an American farming wealth that baffled Japanese understanding. Individual Wisconsin operations yielded harvests surpassing output from whole Japanese provinces. Powered reapers, automated dairy extractors, self-operating nourishment dispensers, innovations rendering a lone U.S. cultivator as efficient as a dozen. The bonds formed between Japanese POWs and local American farmers in Wisconsin shifted remarkably, starting with deep wariness and developing into unexpected warmth. Plenty of those farmers had their own boys battling in the Pacific Theater. Still, they extended simple human kindness to the captives, offering them meals at noontime, passing on agricultural skills, and even hosting them for evening meals, regardless of the rules prohibiting such mingling. Toward the end of 1944, officials at Camp McCoy launched learning initiatives tailored for these Japanese prisoners. Captives there could take courses in English, U.S. history, math, and introductory sciences. The facility's library, filled with volumes in several tongues including Japanese, served as a haven for troops long deprived of anything beyond strict military guides. Options for skill-building workshops abounded, and a number of Japanese POWs joined English lessons that would pay off handsomely in the years following the war back in Japan. Access to U.S. papers and periodicals, despite the era's redactions, opened a glimpse into a free society that flew in the face of the oppressive messaging they'd absorbed for so long. At Camp McCoy during the 1944 holiday season, a wave of emotional turmoil hit the Japanese POWs, shaking their long-held beliefs to the core. Community churches, local clubs, and everyday households dispatched holiday parcels to the site, complete with presents suited to those adhering to Buddhism or Shinto who observed no such traditions. Every Japanese captive got shipments featuring smokes, sweets, personal care items, cozy socks, and scarves crocheted by hand. Accompanying notes, often penned by kids, voiced wishes for harmony and the safe homecoming of the men to their loved ones. The feast that day stretched belief: roast turkey, cured ham, seasoned bread filling, creamy spuds, rich sauce, tart berries, assorted pastries, and heaps of provisions unseen in Japan since prior to the Great War. Japanese POWs were welcome at the chapel's holiday gatherings, although just a handful showed up. The curious few who joined sat through invocations seeking tranquility and the safe passage home for every fighter, foes included. Nearby enclosures housing German POWs offered the Japanese another viewpoint ripe for contrast. Those Germans roamed their areas at ease, set up athletic tournaments, staged plays, issued their own publications, and overall viewed internment as a mere hassle rather than a deep disgrace. The difference stood out sharply. Early on, Japanese POWs withheld their identities, offering only tags. In contrast, Germans bantered with sentries, penned missives to relatives, and sketched out futures beyond the conflict. This easygoing embrace of captivity, free of evident humiliation or thoughts of self-harm, slowly affected the Japanese group. Overseen athletic events between sections introduced Japanese POWs to their German and Italian counterparts. Such exchanges highlighted how prisoner status counted as routine in Western armed forces traditions, far from the profound stigma drilled into Japanese troops. No element perhaps undermined their drilled mindset quite like the mail system. Japanese POWs were urged to correspond with kin via the International Red Cross, but most balked at first, convinced their households presumed them gone, the sole fitting end for any taken alive. Steady efforts by camp leaders to clarify postal privileges chipped away at the reluctance over time. As initial responses from relatives reached Japanese POWs in early 1945, a profound shift swept the barracks. Loved ones conveyed delight at their endurance without a trace of stigma over surrender. Before long, scores of Japanese POWs were sending letters outward. U.S. censors, tasked with vetting every note, showed unusual flexibility, permitting details on living quarters, well-being, and routines. This openness, adversaries green-lighting truthful accounts of handling, clashed head-on with Japanese notions of Yankee trickery. Come April 1945, as U.S. troops stormed Okinawa, Japanese POWs at Camp McCoy caught wind of the clash via library dailies. The reporting proved exhaustive, covering U.S. losses and stumbles alike, revealing a media liberty alien to Japan's controlled regime, which touted triumphs exclusively. Even more jarring came stories of U.S. steps to shield Okinawan non-combatants. Against the grain of Japanese high command's tales of Yankee atrocities on innocents, the dispatches outlined how infantry squads hazarded lives to pull locals from firefights. Medics patched up hurt Japanese civilians, and builders supplied fresh water to displaced groups. When seized Okinawan residents started showing up at continental sites, their direct stories flew against official lines that Americans aimed to wipe out Japanese folk. These eyewitness tales from compatriots chipped further at the enforced worldview. August 6, 1945, the atomic strike on Hiroshima. News of the atomic bombings spread rapidly through American papers accessible to the prisoners at the camp. The initial response from the Japanese captives was one of utter skepticism. No one bomb could possibly wipe out a whole metropolis. Yet with the strike on Nagasaki just 3 days afterward, the grim truth sank in. The mental toll was multifaceted. Revulsion at the devastation intertwined with admiration for U.S. technological prowess, and an odd sense of gratitude that the conflict might conclude without the dreaded ground assault on Japan, which could have claimed millions of lives. Perhaps the deepest response came from the Americans themselves, not jubilation, but a sobering contemplation of the force they had released. Following the blasts, camp officials organized dedicated religious gatherings, where chaplains offered prayers for those lost and voiced aspirations that such arms would remain unused forever. This display of sorrow for adversarial casualties dismantled the last traces of wartime rhetoric portraying Americans as savages. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito's announcement of capitulation arrived at Camp McCoy via renditions in U.S. publications. For the captured Japanese, who had clung to the notion that the fight would rage on until every last one of them perished, this development sparked a profound identity upheaval. Even more astonishing was the U.S. response. There was no crowing over victory, no mistreatment of the now vulnerable detainees, and certainly no cuts to rations or amenities. In fact, the facility's leadership appeared even more attentive to the prisoners' well-being, introducing monitoring for self-harm and extra psychological support. Colonel Rogers spoke directly to the Japanese sections, aided by Nisei translators. The conflict has ended. You'll head back once travel logistics are set. In the meantime, you're under our safeguard. Any sentinel who harms you faces a military trial. You arrived as foes. You'll depart as potential allies. As autumn 1945 unfolded, unforeseen difficulties arose. A number of Japanese prisoners, especially those taken early during the hostilities, dreaded the prospect of repatriation. Their time in captivity had reshaped them, introducing new perspectives and knowledge, and they anticipated facing a ravaged homeland that might shun them as tainted by mere endurance. To address this, the camp's overseers launched initiatives to ready them for return. The detainees underwent practical instruction in areas vital for revival: building trades, wiring, contemporary farming, and introductory health care. Astonishingly, the very U.S. forces that had vanquished Japan were now equipping its prisoners with tools to restore it. Each POW received extra outfits, footwear, and essentials for the voyage ahead, plus cash from the conquering power to kickstart their fresh beginnings. Repatriation kicked off in December 1945, with Japanese prisoners shuttled by rail to Pacific ports, followed by sea passage back to their country. The transcontinental rail trip served as their parting glimpse of U.S. prosperity. Urban centers shifting from wartime factories to everyday manufacturing, fields gearing up for tranquil yields, and households coming together again with troops coming home. In San Francisco, the POWs embarked on vessels bound for Japan, sharing decks with U.S. personnel deploying for the occupation. This bizarre scenario, ex-adversaries journeying side by side toward Japan's renewal, one group as rulers and the other as exiles, fostered distinctive interactions aboard. The ocean voyage spanned 2 weeks, during which the Japanese spent their days bracing for re-entry into a land they recognized as obliterated. Numerous penned missives to U.S. acquaintances, farm owners they'd labored alongside, instructors who'd taught them, and even watchful sentries who'd extended compassion. Such correspondence, archived in diverse collections, highlights deep shifts in their outlook. Upon docking in Yokohama during January 1946, the returning prisoners confronted a nation far more ruined than imagined. Urban areas lay in cinders, inhabitants faced famine, and U.S. occupiers oversaw all. These repatriates, robust and nourished from their U.S. internment, contrasted sharply with the emaciated locals. Greetings varied. Some kin embraced them tearfully, while others viewed them with disgrace. Defeated officials, clinging to old codes, sometimes branded the returnees as sullied and urged them to end their lives for honor's sake. However, U.S. occupation leaders, appreciating the detainees' familiarity with American ways, frequently hired them as linguists and consultants. A good many ex-POWs thus acted as vital links amid the post-war era. Their command of English, grasp of U.S. norms, and absence of aggressive resentment proving assets to both the incoming forces and locals adapting to loss and renewal. These former captives emerged as improbable drivers of Japan's shift toward democracy and progress. Their familiarity with U.S. farming practices, production techniques, and egalitarian ideals rendered them key figures in rebuilding efforts. Quite a few ascended to notable roles in the ensuing years, thanks to their insight into the victor's approaches. Kazuo Sakamaki, the first P, exemplified this trajectory. After returning to Japan, he integrated into Toyota Motor Corporation, leveraging his proficiency in English and his insights into American perspectives to bolster Japan's burgeoning automotive export sector. By 1969, he had ascended to the presidency of Toyota's operations in Brazil, a position unattainable without his time as a POW. He stepped down from his role in 1987 and passed away in 1999, seldom discussing the wartime years until a 1991 gathering where he reconnected with his former submarine, now preserved in a Texas museum. Ex-POWs disseminated American agricultural methods that transformed Japanese farming practices. Some launched enterprises modeled on U.S. frameworks, instructed others in English and Western traditions, offered counsel to government departments on democratic changes, and shared testimonies debunking wartime propaganda by portraying Americans not as fiends, but as prospective allies in peacetime. The learning experiences Japanese POWs encountered in U.S. facilities shaped Japan's sweeping educational overhaul after the war. Those who delved into books and camp libraries grasped the vital link between schooling and both democratic governance and economic progress. Encountering unrestricted newspapers in the camps paved the way for Japan's post-war commitment to an independent press. A number of ex-POWs entered journalism during the occupation era, championing the openness they had observed in the U.S. publications accessible to detainees. Exposure to alternative ideologies and societal structures enabled former POWs to play key roles in Japan's astonishing shift from a militarized regime to a democratic society following the war. Their stories served as a vital conduit between devastation and renewal. Perhaps the deepest legacy of captivity in America lay in its ethical rather than tangible effects. Japanese troops, indoctrinated to view compassion as frailty, came to see that U.S. resilience partly arose from ethical assurance, the capacity to handle adversaries with dignity, undeterred by concerns that it might erode triumph. This ethical facet appeared consistently in later recollections. Ex-POWs found it challenging to convey how U.S. benevolence shattered their preconceptions more thoroughly than any brutality could have. Harshness would merely have validated the propaganda. Benevolence dismantled it completely. The stark difference with Japan's mistreatment of Allied POWs sparked intense remorse. As revelations surfaced about the Bataan Death March, the Burma Railway horrors and routine prisoner torment, those Japanese ex-POWs who had known American decency grappled with collective guilt and individual reckoning. An unforeseen element of daily camp routine that affected returning POWs involved witnessing the contributions of American women during the conflict. Nurses, managers, and auxiliary personnel at the sites showcased abilities far exceeding the confines of Japanese societal norms. Certain POWs labored on farms where women handled equipment and oversaw tasks as men served abroad. This glimpse into evolving gender dynamics altered some returnees' perspectives on women's societal roles. Noting how American output partly derived from harnessing every citizen's potential irrespective of sex, they carried these insights home to a Japan poised for its own advancements in gender equality in the years ahead. In addition to farming and manufacturing skills, Japanese POWs adopted U.S. management strategies and methodical problem-solving techniques. Life in the camps illustrated that American effectiveness stemmed not from innate personal edge, but from replicable processes and protocols. The U.S. method of equipment upkeep especially struck Japanese POWs who were used to running machines to the point of breakdown. Camp trucks and tools underwent routine precautionary servicing, including lubricant replacements and component swaps prior to malfunctions, along with regular checkup routines. Such practices left a mark on Japanese manufacturing approaches in the post-war era. The liberty to practice religion in U.S. camps left its imprint on Japan's religious environment after the war. Buddhist POWs, who had worshipped without interference, came back advocating for faith pluralism and the distancing of religion from governmental authority, a bold idea in the context of Japan's state Shinto system. Acts of goodwill during Christmas from American Christians notably shaped returnees' impressions of the faith. Though conversions were rare, numerous gained appreciation for Christian generosity through direct encounters. This facilitated smoother relations amid the occupation when U.S. missionaries began their work in Japan. Correspondence from relatives that reached Japanese POWs in the camps exposed domestic sentiments clashing with military narratives on dishonorable capitulation. Spouses voicing delight at their husband's survival, mothers valuing alive children over fallen icons, youngsters yearning for parents no matter the loss of martial prestige. Such messages upended POWs' notions of allegiance to kin versus the nation. Back in Japan, ex-POWs frequently placed family ahead of professional ambitions, a departure from prevailing business norms. Their U.S. encounters had revealed that devoted family life and achievement could coexist. American farmhands in centuries frequently mentioned their loved ones, showed pictures, and anticipated family get-togethers after the war. This emphasis on home life proved not a liability but a source of fortitude. American military psychologists, researchers delved deeply into Japanese prisoner of war, POW, psychology during that era. Their findings shaped the policies adopted in the post-war occupation. These investigations uncovered profound mental shifts in Japanese POWs subjected to compassionate care and novel viewpoints. The studies indicated that these prisoners entered captivity burdened by an extreme death before dishonor mindset, so severe that numerous individuals needed ongoing suicide watch for extended periods. However, sustained contact with kind treatment, learning chances, and alternative ideas led to striking alterations in their perspectives. Such research guided reforms in occupation-based schooling, property reallocation, and the rollout of a democratic framework. MacArthur's team featured ex-camp overseers versed in Japanese mentalities via POW monitoring. This expertise prevented errors in the occupation that could have sparked opposition. A number of Japan's innovative post-war corporate practices stemmed from POW encounters with U.S. techniques. The renowned Toyota production method, for instance, adopted principles of streamlined operations that figures like Kazuo Sakamaki and fellow Toyota workers picked up while imprisoned. It emphasized minimizing waste, ongoing refinement, and honoring employees. The idea behind convenience stores, which transformed Japan's retail landscape, drew in part from witnessing U.S. camp commissaries, compact outlets delivering a wide array of products effectively. These U.S. approaches, initially observed in detention, played a role in evolving Japanese commerce. Ex-POWs upon repatriation served as key mediators of culture amid the occupation and afterward. Their distinctive background, gaining an internal view of America while holding on to Japanese roots, proved invaluable for both countries transitioning from hostility to partnership. These links between cultures went further than formal diplomacy. Certain returning POWs kept up letters with U.S. camp personnel, locals, and households that had displayed generosity. Records of these bonds, preserved in assorted historical collections, highlight everyday efforts at healing that outpaced state-level partnerships. Back home, returning POWs confronted distinct obstacles tied to their veteran standing. Often Japanese officials withheld entitlements from them, deeming capitulation a stain on honor irrespective of context. Such bias lingered for years, barring POWs from vets groups and memorial events. The contradiction stung sharply. Individuals who acquired useful skills and networks aiding Japan's reconstruction faced formal disgrace merely for enduring. It wasn't until the 1970s that groups for former POWs emerged, pushing for acknowledgement and airing long-silenced stories. Over time, these groups secured validation, especially following Emperor Hirohito's passing in 1989, which lifted lingering shadows from the imperial past. Surviving POWs started sharing their tales openly, enriching Japan's grasp of war-era events and ties with America. Offspring of these repatriated POWs displayed atypical traits within Japan's emphasis on uniformity, such as challenging norms, prizing personal voice, and seeking global professions. These ripple effects in the next generation pointed to lasting mental evolutions in the prisoners that reshaped household interactions. The grandchildren of POWs demonstrated an even keener global focus. A significant portion pursued studies overseas, especially in the U.S., motivated by ancestral accounts of surprising benevolence from one-time foes. These learning connections, grounded in POW histories, fortified bonds between Japan and America over successive waves. After the war, Japanese scholars examined the POW ordeal as a rare lens into U.S. culture and native psychology. Their work identified recurring themes: early suicidal impulses, slow embrace of continued life, eagerness for knowledge, shifts in outlook, and worries about reintegration. This scholarship spurred changes in Japan's armed forces training, phasing out the death before dishonor doctrine and adding instruction on the Geneva Conventions. Grasping how rigid military programming could yield to caring approaches offered key lessons on mindset dynamics and societal shifts. U.S. academics likewise probed Japanese POW narratives, appreciating their special insights into belief conditioning and evolution. These analyses advanced wider knowledge of altering entrenched convictions via lived encounters over mere debate. The 1995 marking of World War II's conclusion's 50th year spotlighted POW stories anew. Collaborative events between Japan and the U.S. featured survivor accounts of unforeseen U.S. goodwill that turned adversaries into friends. Such gatherings aided both peoples in appreciating the nuances of their joint past. Kazuo Sakamaki's 1991 trip back to America for a history gathering drew notable press coverage. As the initial Japanese POW, confronting his old submarine, now an exhibit piece after half a century, offered a striking emblem of change. His heartfelt response, aired worldwide, brought historical rivals to life for the youth. These remembrances assisted newer cohorts in comprehending how past adversaries forged alliances through bonds between people formed despite the bonds of imprisonment. The accounts of Japanese prisoners of war, POWs, who braced for brutality yet encountered compassion, wove into the broader tale of healing after the war. In the present day, offspring of those Japanese POWs and U.S. camp staff nurture ties that began 8 decades back. Although nearly all the first-hand witnesses have departed this life, their kin uphold the shift from hostility to camaraderie via ongoing interactions and memorials. At the Camp McCoy History Center, collections of Japanese POW records endure, encompassing relics, correspondence, and images contributed by ex-captives and their loved ones. These resources, now more often converted to digital formats for international reach, supply scholars everywhere with first-hand documents on effective faux reintegration. Programs linking educational groups from the U.S. and Japan, drawing from wartime detainee encounters, keep bolstering ties across the two nations. Young learners absorb how adversaries turned into companions via benevolence instead of domination, a teaching that holds enduring value. The figures reveal an extraordinary account of POW management triumph. Roughly 5,000 Japanese POWs were detained in facilities on the continental United States. Between 35,000 and 50,000 Japanese POWs overall were seized by forces of the Western Allies. The majority resided in sites in Australia and New Zealand. Camp McCoy in Wisconsin stood as the biggest American site, peaking at 3,000 Japanese POWs. Additional facilities included Camp Kennedy in Rhode Island, Camp Clarinda in Iowa, and Angel Island in California. Each day, detainees got 2,800 calories in provisions, matching those for American troops. POW earnings reached 80 cents daily for farm work. Death rates in U.S. sites remained exceptionally minimal. By contrast, 27% of Allied POWs perished in Japanese facilities. Efforts to flee stayed scarce. The vast majority of Japanese POWs refrained from breakout tries. After the war, numerous kept up letters with their American contacts. The ordeal of Japanese POWs in the United States amid World War II delivers deep insights into resolving disputes, restoring foes, and constructing peace via compassion over retribution. Victory arose from steadfast commitment to global standards, despite foes' savage breaches of them. This uneven ethic, handling adversaries more humanely than they handled you, emerged as tactically astute. Japanese POWs went back to their homeland as unwitting envoys for America. Their reports of surprising goodwill eroded anti-U.S. rhetoric more potently than any propaganda effort. Financial gains also materialized significantly. Japan's economic boom after the conflict partly originated from ex-POWs sharing U.S. techniques and sustaining commercial links. Various prominent Japanese firms hired former POWs precisely for their U.S. expertise and networks. Yet past calculated and fiscal upsides rested a deeper ethical triumph. America validated democracy's edge via deed rather than coercion. The evolution of Japanese POWs from zealous opponents to thankful partners showed that mercy might accomplish what aggression could not. The narrative of Japanese POWs anticipating harshness but gaining American warmth serves as evidence of democracy's ethical strength. These individuals showed up convinced that demise alone preserved their honor. They departed, grasping that a well-led existence could uphold both self-respect and worldwide harmony. Their shift from Bushido adherents to democratic participants illustrated that rivals don't have to stay rivals indefinitely. The goodwill they knew in confinement sprouted as foundations of partnership that bloomed into one of the most solid global alliances in history. Contemporary U.S.-Japan bonds, erected on past animosity reshaped by humaneness, highlight the feasibility of mending even after fierce strife. The chaplain at camp who offered prayers for fallen foes, the growers who broke bread with laboring detainees, the households that dispatched holiday presents to adversaries. Such everyday Americans displaying remarkable integrity accomplished what battlefield success by itself could not. True change in attitudes and outlooks. In our era, with global disputes appearing endless and foes beyond saving, the Japanese POW saga provides optimism. It shows that benevolence outpowers harshness, that clemency accomplishes what might fails to, that foes of now can turn into partners of the future if handled with respect amid old grudges. The Japanese troops who dreaded torment yet found goodwill, who foresaw demise yet found vitality, who came as opponents yet went as companions, urge us that change remains achievable amid humanity's bleakest times. Their path from the Pearl Harbor assault to aiding Japan's reconstruction alongside America reveals that revenge loops can shatter through ethical compassion. Ultimately, America's paramount success in the Pacific theater transcended the armed. It was ethical. Through granting Japanese POWs unforeseen warmth, America subdued not merely enemy troops, but secured a profounder win, affirming that democratic ideals could reshape even the fiercest conditioned adversaries. The roughly 5,000 those Japanese captives who witnessed American compassion firsthand on U.S. territory, alongside countless others in Allied detention facilities, brought that profound encounter home to Japan. They planted the roots of democratic ideals and goodwill in what had been adversarial ground. Accounts of U.S. benevolence, safeguarded in records and personal recollections, still impart the lesson that foes don't have to stay foes when bravery steps in to shatter the chain of animosity via unforeseen mercy. This chapter in history warrants commemoration not just as a quirky footnote from the war, but as a model for reshaping today's entrenched disputes. If troops from Japan, conditioned to embrace death over disgrace, could evolve into democratic participants via encounters with benevolence, then contemporary adversaries that appear impossible to reconcile might likewise change through steadfast compassion. The U.S. sentries who shielded inmates from self-harm, the physicians who mended foes' injuries, the instructors who schooled antagonistic learners, the spiritual guide who offered prayers for adversarial spirits. These everyday individuals, through exceptional acts of goodwill, secured an enduring triumph by way of ethical resolve. Their legacy persists in motivating others, underscoring that real power resides not in annihilating rivals, but in reshaping them. The path of Japanese POWs, from bracing for torment to receiving care, from facing demise to finding vitality, from entering as combatants to departing as allies, reveals the core potency of democracy. The capacity to convert adversaries by demonstration instead of domination. Their ordeal affirms that compassion accomplishes what force cannot, that generosity prevails where brutality stumbles. The narrative concludes not in domination but in renewal, not in yielding but in evolution, not in perpetual conflict but in enduring bonds. The Japanese warriors who struck Pearl Harbor and wound up in American POW sites encountered something surpassing battlefield loss. They encountered the reshaping force of unanticipated generosity, which altered their views on might, dignity, and human nature. Their enduring impact echoes in each joint Japanese-American venture, scholarly collaboration, and diplomatic tie. The benevolence extended to wartime detainees 8 decades past forged interpersonal links that rose above battle-fueled resentment, erecting pathways between once-opposed nations that grow firmer over time, showing that our noblest traits can surface amid conflict's darkest hours.